The gilded cage of Elara's penthouse had never felt so suffocating. Sunlight streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows, illuminating dust motes dancing above the polished marble floors, a stark contrast to the cold dread solidifying in her chest. She stood frozen in the doorway of her private study, a crystal glass of untouched champagne in her hand, her entire world narrowing to the low, urgent murmur coming from the balcony. Julian, her fiancé, stood with his back to her, his silhouette sharp against the bright skyline. His voice, usually a smooth, practiced instrument reserved for boardrooms and charming her parents, was clipped and unfamiliar. "No, it has to be before the signing. The prenup is airtight, but we need everything in place before she has access. Yes, the trust fund is the primary target. Just keep digging. I need leverage." The words were ice water thrown on the warm, dreamy future she had painted for them. Target, leverage, prenup. They were cold, transactional terms that had no place in the language of love he had so fluently spoken to her for the past year. The man on the balcony was a stranger wearing her fiancé's custom-tailored suit. He ended the call and turned, his face instantly rearranging itself into the affectionate, doting mask she knew so well. The transformation was so seamless, it was terrifying. He smiled, his eyes crinkling at the corners in the way that used to make her heart flutter. Now it made her nauseous. "There's my beautiful girl," he said, crossing the room to kiss her forehead. His lips felt like a brand of deceit. "Just finalizing some tedious merger details. You know how it is." She forced a smile, her muscles screaming in protest. The champagne flute felt dangerously fragile in her suddenly numb fingers. She spent the rest of the afternoon in a haze, watching him, studying the curve of his smile, the ease of his lies. Every compliment felt like a calculated move, every touch a carefully plotted manipulation. The seeds of doubt, sown by that cryptic call, took root with vicious speed, their thorny vines twisting around her heart. That evening, she couldn't bear the silence of her own thoughts. She found herself at the cozy apartment of her oldest friend, Lena, sitting on a worn velvet sofa, surrounded by the comforting clutter of real life. The whole story spilled out of her in a choked, trembling rush. She described the call, the change in his demeanor, the chilling vocabulary. Lena listened, her expression growing graver with each word. When Elara finished, the silence was heavy. Lena leaned forward, her eyes alight with a fierce, protective intensity. "You need to know for sure," Lena stated, her voice low and serious. "You can't confront him. He'll just spin more pretty lies. You need proof. You need to see him when he doesn't know you're watching." The idea was absurd, ludicrous. But the alternative, marrying a man who saw her inheritance as a primary target, was unthinkable. "How?" Elara whispered, the word barely audible. A slow, determined smile spread across Lena's face. "He's hiring new staff for the estate, right? For the happy couple. You become the help. You go undercover. You become a ghost in his own house and learn the truth he's hiding." The sheer audacity of the plan hung in the air, a dangerous and intoxicating promise of answers. It was extreme. It was madness. But in the wreckage of her crumbling fairy tale, it was the only path forward that didn't end in willful ignorance. The heiress would have to disappear, if only to discover what her prince truly was. The transformation began not in a glamorous boutique, but in the hushed, linen-scented quiet of the estate's staff quarters, under the guidance of the only person Elara trusted implicitly. Mrs. Higgins, her family's housekeeper for 3 decades, regarded her with a mixture of profound sadness and steely resolve. Her capable hands, usually busy polishing silver or arranging flowers, now held the tools of Elara's deception. First came the clothing. Out came a simple, dove-gray dress of coarse, unyielding cotton, its high neck and long sleeves a world away from the silk and cashmere that usually graced Elara's skin. A stiff white apron, a pair of scuffed, sensible black shoes that pinched her toes, and a lace cap that threatened to slip from her perfectly styled hair completed the uniform. Dressed as Clara, Elara stared at her reflection in the full-length mirror. The woman staring back was a stranger, Her eyes too wide in a pale, unadorned face, her posture diminished by the drab fabric. The heiress had been erased. Next was the story. Mrs. Higgins drilled her voice low and firm. Clara was from a small northern town, the second eldest of 6, seeking work in the city to send money home. She had basic schooling, experience in a small hotel, and references forged with meticulous care by Mrs. Higgins's nephew, a printer with flexible morals. Elara repeated the details until they felt like a second skin, until the name Clara stopped sounding foreign on her tongue and started to feel like a shield. The final, most humbling step was the lesson. In the vast, silent kitchen, Mrs. Higgins demonstrated how to properly dust a room, not a casual flick of a feather duster, but a methodical process of lifting each object, wiping beneath it, and returning it to its exact original position. She showed Elara how to sweep debris into a dustpan without scattering it, how to polish a vast expanse of wooden floor without leaving streaks, and the precise angle to hold a brush to scrub a stubborn mark from a porcelain sink without scratching the surface. Elara's hands, accustomed to holding a pen or a champagne flute, grew red and rough from the unfamiliar chemicals and effort. Each clumsy movement was a stark reminder of the chasm between her life and the one she was about to step into. A potent cocktail of emotions churned within her. A thrill of excitement, dark and illicit, pulsed under her skin. She was an actress preparing for the role of a lifetime, stepping onto a stage where the stakes were her entire future. But it was underscored by a deep, cold dread that settled in her bones. This was not a game. She was willingly walking into the lion's den, disguising herself as a lamb to see if the lion would bare its teeth. The opulent world she was born into was about to be viewed from its knees, and she feared what that new, unforgiving perspective would reveal, not just about Julian, but about herself. With a final, steadying breath, Clara squared her shoulders, the weight of the deception as tangible as the rough cotton of her dress. She was ready to infiltrate her own life. The iron gates of Julian's estate swung open with a silent, hydraulic grace that felt more like a trap, springing shut than a welcome. Clara, not Elara, she had to remember that. She was Clara, stood at the threshold, her heart hammering a frantic rhythm against her ribs that seemed loud enough to echo off the manicured hedges. The gravel of the drive crunched under her cheap, ill-fitting shoes, each step a small betrayal of the woman who usually arrived here in a chauffeured car, expecting embraces, not instructions. The house loomed before her, a monument of glass and pale stone, its modern lines stark against the soft morning sky. She had always admired its bold architecture, seeing it as a testament to Julian's success, a beautiful shell for their future. Now, approaching the servants' entrance tucked discreetly around the side, it felt cold and imposing, a fortress she had to breach. Every window seemed like a watchful eye. A stern-faced woman in a crisp, dark dress answered her timid knock, ushering her into a stark utilitarian hallway that smelled of lemon polish and bleach. This was the engine room of the beautiful machine, a world of humming appliances and linoleum floors hidden from the sun-drenched living spaces. Clara was directed to a hard-backed chair to wait, her hands clasped tightly in her lap to still their trembling. The wait was an agony of anticipation. Every sound, the distant hum of a vacuum, the click of heels on tile, made her jump. She rehearsed her story in her mind over and over, the fabricated details of Clara's life feeling flimsy and transparent. What if he saw through it immediately? What if one look into her eyes, even shadowed by the ridiculous lace cap, and he recognized the woman he was supposed to marry? The door to the study opened finally, and the housekeeper gestured her inside. Julian stood by a vast desk of polished ebony, his attention on a tablet in his hand. He didn't look up as she entered, didn't acknowledge her presence beyond a slight, impatient wave for her to approach. The air in the room was cool, scented with his familiar cologne and the faint, sharp smell of espresso. She moved forward, her footsteps silent on the thick rug, her gaze fixed on the top of his bent head. This was the moment. She held her breath, waiting for his eyes to lift, for recognition to dawn, for the whole charade to come crashing down around her. He finally looked up. His gaze swept over her, a quick, impersonal assessment that lingered on nothing. Not her face, not her nervous posture. It was the look one gave a piece of furniture, evaluating its function, its usefulness. There was no flicker of curiosity, no hint of familiarity, only a detached, bored authority. He asked a few curt questions about her references and experience, his voice flat and businesslike, his eyes already drifting back to his tablet before she had finished her rehearsed, meek replies. He dismissed her qualifications with a non-committal grunt, his attention clearly elsewhere. The sting was surprisingly acute, a sharp little needle of humiliation piercing through her relief. She had prepared for his anger, his suspicion, but she had never anticipated this utter, complete dismissal. To the man she loved, the man she was to marry in a matter of weeks. She was not even worth a second glance. She was simply staff, an appliance to be acquired. The coldness in his demeanor was a deeper betrayal than any heated argument could have been. A chilling preview of a truth she was only beginning to grasp. The housekeeper, Mrs. Davies, was a woman carved from efficiency and starch. Her posture was ramrod straight, her gaze sharp and assessing, missing nothing. She led Clara from Julian's study with a clipped gesture, her keys jangling at her waist like a warning bell. The tour began, a brisk march through the underbelly of the opulent estate. They moved through a labyrinth of service corridors, their walls painted a utilitarian cream, a stark contrast to the art-adorned hallways Elara knew so well. Mrs. Davies pointed out the staff break room with its humming refrigerator and simple table, the laundry with its industrial-sized washers churning with linens Elara herself had chosen, the housekeeping closet stocked with an arsenal of cleaning supplies that smelled sharply of chemicals and discipline. Each room was a reminder of the invisible machinery that kept the beautiful facade running smoothly, a world designed to be unseen by the people it served. Then they ascended a narrow, carpeted staircase emerging into the main living areas. The transition was jarring. Sunlight flooded the vast, open-plan living room, glinting off the polished concrete floors and the soaring glass walls that offered a breathtaking view of the manicured gardens. Here, the air smelled of expensive candles and fresh-cut flowers from hothouses. Elara's own interior designer had helped select the low-slung cream-colored sofa, the massive abstract painting that dominated one wall, the sculpture of twisted bronze that stood sentinel in the corner. She had chosen these things imagining lazy Sunday mornings, parties filled with laughter, a life shared. Now she saw it all from a new, devastating angle. Mrs. Davies's voice was a dry monotone listing Clara's duties. She was to dust every surface daily, ensuring no fingerprint marred the glass coffee table. She was to vacuum the priceless silk rug with a specific, gentle attachment. She was to polish the chrome fixtures in the guest powder room until they shone like mirrors. Each instruction was a tiny incision. This was not her home to enjoy. It was her prison to maintain. The tour culminated on the second floor, outside the door to the master suite, their suite. The door was ajar, and Mrs. Davies pushed it open. Elara's breath caught in her throat. The room was exactly as she and Julian had planned it together. The vast platform bed with its linen-upholstered headboard, the sheer curtains that billowed in the breeze, the private balcony overlooking the city. Her own vanity, yet to be moved in, was meant to sit in that sunlit corner. "You will not enter this room unless specifically instructed," Mrs. Davies stated firmly. "Mr. Thorne values his privacy above all else." The words landed with the force of a physical blow. This sanctuary, conceived in love and excitement, was now a forbidden zone. She was to clean around the edges of the life she was supposed to be living at the center of. A profound sense of isolation washed over her, cold and absolute. She was a ghost in her own future, invisible, unheard, separated from the world of privilege she had been born into by a gray dress and a set of stern rules. The opulence that had once promised comfort and joy now seemed like a beautifully decorated cage, and she was on the wrong side of the bars, holding a dust rag. The weight of her deception had never felt heavier, nor her loneliness more complete. The scent of lemon polish and the soft rasp of cloth against mahogany filled the hushed silence of Julian's study. Clara moved with a practiced caution she had not possessed the day before, her motions slow and deliberate, The door opened without warning, the sound a sharp intrusion in the quiet. Julian strode in, his focus entirely on the phone pressed to his ear. He did not glance her way, did not register her presence in any way. Elara's breath hitched. She forced herself to continue her work, moving to a bookshelf lined with leather-bound volumes that looked untouched, her body tense with the effort of appearing inconsequential. His voice, low and smooth, filled the room, but the tone was all wrong. This was not the charming, attentive man who had whispered promises of forever into her hair. "No, he doesn't get a counteroffer," Julian said, his voice dripping with a condescension that made her skin prickle. "The terms are the terms. If he can't see the writing on the wall, that's his problem, not mine. Let him sink with his failing company. We'll pick up the pieces for pennies." There was a pause as he listened, a cold, humorless chuckle escaping him. "Sentiment has no place in business, Michael. You know that. He's a dinosaur, and it's time for extinction. Apply pressure on the lenders. I want him desperate by Thursday." Elara's hand stilled on the spine of a book. This was a side of Julian she had never witnessed. She had seen his ambition, his drive, but always tempered with a polished, sociable charm. This was raw, unfiltered ruthlessness. He spoke of ruining a man's life with the same casual disinterest he had shown her during her interview. The coldness wasn't reserved just for the staff. It was the core of him, a frigid streak she had been blinded to by his calculated affection. The man on the phone was the real Julian Thorne, and the realization settled in her stomach like a shard of ice. She was engaged to a predator, and she had willingly walked into his den. The morning sun slanted through the study's blinds, striping the polished floor with bars of light and shadow. Clara moved through the room with a quiet rhythm born of 2 days of practice, her movements economical, her presence designed to be forgotten. The air was still, thick with the scent of old paper and the faint, expensive aroma of Julian's cologne that clung to the leather chair. She ran her dustcloth over the bookshelves, the picture frames, the cold surface of the desk, her eyes cataloging everything, searching for a crack in the perfect, impenetrable facade he presented to the world. Her task brought her to the wastebasket tucked discreetly beside the desk. It was a simple, brushed steel bin, nearly empty save for a few crumpled balls of paper and the shredded remains of what looked like discarded documents. A part of her, the part that was still Elara, recoiled at the indignity of rifling through trash. But Clara, the ghost, felt no such hesitation. Her fingers, now slightly roughened from work, reached in and carefully retrieved one of the less destroyed paper balls. She smoothed it out on her apron, her heart beginning a slow, heavy thud against her ribs. It was a torn corner of what might have been a notepad page, the edges rough. On it, in a swift, looping script that was decidedly not Julian's precise, angular hand, was written a time, 8 p.m., a date for the following Friday, and 3 words that made the blood drain from her face. The usual place. The handwriting was elegant, almost flirtatious in its casual sweep. It spoke of familiarity, of a history that existed outside the sterile confines of this office and his business calls. This was not a note about mergers or acquisitions. This was personal. Her mind raced, conjuring images of secret meetings, of whispered conversations in shadowy corners. The cold, dismissive man who saw people as obstacles or assets apparently had a usual place with someone. Her initial suspicion, born from an overheard phone call, now deepened into a chilling certainty. He was hiding something that required clandestine notes and discreet disposal. The scrap of paper in her hand felt less like trash and more like the first piece of a dangerous puzzle, its edges sharp enough to draw blood. She carefully folded it and tucked it into the hidden pocket of her maid's dress, a secret now kept close to her own heart. The hunt had truly begun. The chime of the doorbell echoed through the cavernous entrance hall, a sound that usually signaled the arrival of a delivery or a tradesperson. Clara, on her hands and knees polishing the intricate inlay of the marble floor, did not look up. Her back ached, her knees were sore, and the rhythmic motion of buffing the stone had lulled her into a numb, weary trance. It was Mrs. Davies's sharp intake of breath that broke the spell. Clara glanced up to see the housekeeper smoothing her already immaculate apron, her posture stiffening into one of alert deference. That was unusual. Mrs. Davies did not defer to deliverymen. A cold prickle of intuition traced its way down Clara's spine. She shuffled back into the shadow of a towering potted fern, making herself small, her cloth still clutched in her reddened hand. Julian himself answered the door, an occurrence so rare it felt like witnessing a celestial event. The stern, impatient mask he wore for his staff melted away, replaced by an expression of such open warmth and delight that Elara felt the air leave her lungs. The transformation was instantaneous and complete. The woman standing on the threshold was breathtaking. She was tall and willowy, dressed in an elegant sheath of emerald green that clung to her frame and whispered of exclusive designers and private fittings. Her dark hair was swept into a sophisticated chignon, and her smile as she looked at Julian was both intimate and knowing. She was everything Elara, in her drab gray uniform and dust-streaked face, was not. Julian took her hand, not for a formal handshake but to draw her inside, his fingers lingering on hers. He leaned in, his voice a low, affectionate murmur that carried easily in the quiet hall. He brushed a kiss against her cheek, a gesture that was far too familiar, far too tender for a business associate. His entire being was focused on her, his attention absolute and unwavering. He took her coat, his movements solicitous, his eyes never leaving her face. He was attentive, charming, the perfect picture of a besotted host, a hot, sharp blade of jealousy twisted in Elara's gut, so potent it was nauseating. This was the man who had proposed to her under the stars, who had spoken of building a family. This was the man who, mere days ago, had looked straight through her as if she were made of glass. The contrast was a brutal physical blow. He offered this stunning stranger the warmth and affection he withheld from his staff, and worse, a version of attention that felt more genuine, more present, than the polished performative charm he often used with Elara herself. The seeds of doubt erupted into a forest of dark, choking certainty. She was not just investigating a financial scheme, she was witnessing a betrayal of the heart, and the pain of it was far more excruciating than she had ever imagined. The polished marble felt cold and unforgiving against her knees as Elara pressed herself deeper into the shadow of the potted fern, its broad leaves offering a fragile veil. The murmur of their voices receded as Julian led the woman further into the house, toward his study or the main sitting room. A frantic, desperate energy seized her. She had to know. She had to hear. Abandoning her polishing rag, she moved on silent, careful feet, slipping down a service corridor that ran parallel to the main hallway. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a wild, panicked drumbeat that seemed to echo in the narrow, utilitarian space. She found a small alcove where a landscape painting was slightly askew, its edge providing a slim sightline into the grand living room through the parted double doors. She pressed herself into the darkness, her breathing shallow, every sense acutely tuned. They stood near the fireplace, their profiles sharp against the minimalist backdrop. Julian poured 2 glasses of amber liquid from a crystal decanter, handing one to the woman with a smile that didn't reach his eyes, but held a calculating warmth. Elara strained to catch their words, the low hum of their conversation filtering through the gap. "Everything is falling into place," the woman was saying, her voice a confident, smooth alto. She accepted the glass, her fingers brushing his. "The final pieces just need to be moved into position." Julian nodded, his gaze intense. "And the timeline? It has to be before the wedding. After that it becomes infinitely more complicated." A soft, knowing laugh. "Don't worry, the windfall is all but guaranteed. Once the papers are signed, it's irrevocable. We'll be set." The word windfall landed like a physical blow, sucking the air from Elara's lungs. It was the same cold, transactional term from the phone call that had started this nightmare. It wasn't just about her money. It was a coordinated plan, a windfall he was discussing with this elegant stranger. This wasn't a mere affair, it was a conspiracy. The woman took a sip of her drink, her eyes scanning the room with an appraising, almost proprietary air. "It's a beautiful house. It will be even more stunning once it's properly lived in. The implication was clear, a vile promise of a future that excluded Elara entirely. A wave of sickness, hot and acrid, rose in her throat, a nauseating cocktail of jealousy, betrayal, and a fear so profound it turned her blood to ice. She saw it all now. The cold prenup, the investigation into her assets, this secret partner. He wasn't just marrying her for her money. He was looting her life with the accomplice, and this beautiful, composed woman was undoubtedly his mistress, his partner in this cruel deception. The room seemed to tilt around her. She clutched at the wall for support, the rough texture of the plaster a stark anchor in a world that had just shattered into a million sharp, glittering pieces. The truth was no longer a suspicion. It was a monster standing in her living room, drinking her fiancé's whiskey and planning her ruin. The jangle of metal was a sharp, percussive sound in the quiet of the housekeeping closet. Mrs. Davies's capable hands sorted through a heavy ring crowded with keys of all shapes and sizes, each one a tiny promise of access or a symbol of prohibition. Clara stood before her, the scent of bleach and lavender polish thick in the air. Her own hands clasped loosely behind her back to hide their faint tremor. "This one," Mrs. Davies said, her voice a low, practical murmur as she detached a small brass key, "is for the linen cupboards on the second floor. This silver one opens the supply cabinets in the cellar." She worked her way through the ring with efficient certainty, her fingers pausing only once, hovering over a key that was noticeably older than the others, its iron darkened with age and use, its teeth worn smooth. "And this," she said, her tone shifting almost imperceptibly, a note of caution entering her dry delivery, "opens every desk and bureau drawer in the house. Every one, that is, except for the locked bottom right drawer of Mr. Thorne's desk in his study." She held the old iron key aloft for a moment as if it were both a tool and a warning. "That drawer is his private domain. His express orders are that it is never to be opened, never to be cleaned, never to be so much as touched. Its contents are his business alone. You are to dust around it as you would any other piece of furniture, but you are not to attempt to open it. Is that perfectly clear?" Clara nodded, her throat too tight for words. She accepted the heavy key ring, its weight a cold metallic anchor in her palm. The other keys were just objects, tools for her menial tasks. But the iron key, the one that opened almost everything, felt different. It felt like a challenge. Mrs. Davies's warning had not quelled her curiosity. It had ignited it into a roaring blaze. The rest of the day passed in a fog. As she went about her duties, changing bedsheets, scrubbing bathrooms, vacuuming silent hallways, her mind was not on her work. It was trapped in that study, fixated on that single forbidden drawer. What could it contain that required such specific, severe protection? Financial documents more damning than she had already uncovered. Love letters from the woman in green. Some dark secret from his past? The locked drawer ceased to be a piece of furniture and became an obsession, a siren's call drowning out all other thought. It was the physical manifestation of all his deceit, the one thing he felt the need to hide even from his own staff. The key to almost everything now felt like a taunt, its limitations a dare. With every passing hour, the desire to know what lay within that dark, private space grew from a whisper to a scream, a compulsion that tightened its grip on her heart until it was all she could think about. The answer to every question he refused to answer. The iron key felt like a live thing in Clara's palm, its cold weight a constant throbbing reminder of the single barrier between her and the truth. For 2 days, it had burned a hole in the pocket of her dress, its presence a whisper that grew louder with every passing hour spent dusting, sweeping, polishing around the edges of Julian's life. The locked drawer in his desk had become the axis on which her entire world now spun, a dark, silent vault holding the answers to every lie, every cold glance, every whispered conversation about windfalls and usual places. The opportunity arrived cloaked in mundane routine. A last-minute off-site meeting had pulled Julian from the house for the entire afternoon, a fact confirmed by the sudden relaxation in Mrs. Davies's shoulders and the quiet gossip exchanged between the other staff. The estate, for a few precious hours, belonged to the ghosts again. Her hands were slick with a cold sweat as she approached the study door. her pulse a frantic drumbeat in her ears. The hallway was deserted, the only sound the distant hum of the refrigerator from the kitchen below. She slipped inside, closing the door behind her with a soft, definitive click that seemed to echo in the tense silence. The desk stood as it always did, a monolith of polished ebony, its surface gleaming under the afternoon light. Her eyes went immediately to the bottom right drawer, the one distinct from the others, its keyhole a dark, unblinking eye. She fumbled with the heavy keyring, her fingers clumsy with adrenaline, the metallic jangle absurdly loud in the hushed room. She found the old, worn iron key, its teeth fitting the lock with a grim, satisfying perfection. She knelt before the drawer, her rough maid's dress pooling on the floor around her. For a long moment she simply stared at the key in the lock, her breath caught in her chest. This was the point of no return. Whatever lay inside would shatter the remains of her old life irrevocably. With a final shuddering breath that was more a sob than a sigh, she turned the key. The mechanism clicked with a smooth, well-oiled sound that was horrifyingly loud. Her hands, trembling violently now, gripped the cold brass handle and pulled. The drawer slid open without a sound, revealing its contents not as a chaotic jumble, but as a neat, organized file. And on the tab of that file, typed in crisp, professional font, was her own name, Elara Vance. The world narrowed to that single point. The air left her lungs in a rush. Her own name in this forbidden drawer, in the desk of the man she was to marry, felt like the most profound violation imaginable. With fingers that felt numb and foreign, she lifted the file out. It was heavier than it looked. She laid it on the floor, the cool wood against her knees, and with a sense of dread that was almost paralytic, she opened the cover. Inside were documents, page after page of detailed, coldly clinical financial records. Statements from her trust fund, valuations of the Vance family holdings, commercial properties, art collections, stock portfolios. Every asset, every source of her wealth was cataloged here with meticulous, predatory precision. Numbers and figures danced before her eyes, but their meaning was chillingly clear. This was not the file of a loving fiancé. It was the dossier of a predator sizing up his prey. He hadn't just been interested in her money. He had been inventorying it, itemizing her very inheritance for his own use. The betrayal was no longer a suspicion. It was here, in black and white, laid out in a forbidden drawer for his private perusal. The foundation of their relationship crumbled to dust beneath her knees, leaving her kneeling on cold hardwood, staring at the ruins of her future. The financial documents were a cold clinical inventory of her life, each line item a calculated assessment of her worth. But it was what lay beneath them that truly stilled the air in her lungs, that turned the clinical into the cruel. Her numb fingers, moving as if guided by some terrible instinct, pushed the asset lists aside. Beneath them, crisp and official, was a prenuptial agreement. Her eyes scanned the dense legalese, the paragraphs blurring until they snagged on the clauses outlining the division of assets in the event of a divorce. The terms were brutally, overwhelmingly one-sided. In stark, unforgiving black and white, the document stipulated that she would walk away with virtually nothing, a paltry, almost insulting sum that wouldn't cover the annual taxes on one of her family's properties. Everything else, every stock, every property, every dollar of her inheritance would be irrevocably his. It was not a protection for both parties. It was a financial ambush, a legalized theft he had been planning all along. The signature at the bottom, her own, looked like the mark of a fool, a naive child who had signed her life away without reading the fine print. But the final layer of the betrayal was the most personal, the most vile. Tucked beneath the prenup was another contract, this one on the letterhead of a firm called Veritas Investigations. The subject of the investigation was listed plainly, Elara Vance, and the client who had commissioned it, Julian Thorne. The objective was outlined in cold professional terms: a comprehensive background check, financial deep dive, and ongoing surveillance to uncover any potential vulnerabilities, past indiscretions, or hidden assets. And there, clipped to the final page, was a photograph. It was a candid shot, taken from a distance with a long lens. It showed the woman from the hallway, the elegant figure in emerald green, leaving a nondescript office building. But in this context, she was not a mistress. She was an asset. Printed neatly beside the photo was her name and title: Isabel Rossi, lead investigator. The world tilted on its axis, the opulent study swimming before Elara's eyes. The beautiful, composed woman wasn't his lover. She was his spy. The affectionate greeting, the intimate conversation about windfalls and futures. It hadn't been a romantic rendezvous. It had been a debriefing. He had hired a private investigator to dig into the most intimate corners of her life, to unearth any leverage he could use, and then he had welcomed that woman into their home with a smile, discussing the spoils of their invasion like partners. The betrayal was so complete, so multi-layered, it felt less like a stab in the back and more like a systematic dismantling of her entire being. He hadn't just wanted her money. He had wanted to own her, to know every secret she possessed so he could better control her, better loot her life. The coldness of it was absolute, a void where a heart should have been. She remained on her knees amidst the damning evidence. The proof of his calculated treachery spread around her like the pieces of her own shattered soul. The evidence felt like a physical weight in the hidden pocket of Clara's dress, its presence a constant cold reminder of the precipice upon which she now stood. The damning file, the prenup, the investigator's contract, they were not just papers. They were the shattered pieces of the future she had believed in, sharp enough to cut the hand that held them. For a full day, she had moved through the house like an automaton, performing her duties with numb efficiency, while her mind screamed with the need for resolution. The charade had become unbearable. The truth, however ugly, demanded to be faced. The decision crystallized during the silent pre-dawn hours as she lay in her narrow cot in the staff quarters. She would not skulk away. She would not simply disappear. He would look her in the eye, even if he only saw the maid, and she would force a reckoning. The plan was audacious, dangerous, a lit match held to the powder keg of his deception. She waited until mid-morning when she knew he would be in his study, insulated by his own importance. Her heart was a wild, caged thing beating against her ribs as she approached the heavy oak door. She raised a hand that trembled only slightly and knocked, the sound firm and clear, belying the turmoil within. A curt "enter" came from the other side. She pushed the door open. Julian was at his desk, his attention fixed on a spreadsheet glowing on his monitor. He did not look up, his impatience a palpable force in the room. "What is it?" he snapped, his fingers still tapping at the keyboard. She took a steadying breath, the coarse fabric of her dress suddenly feeling like a flimsy disguise. "I need to speak with you, sir. It's important." Her voice, though quiet, did not waver. This finally drew his gaze. His eyes, cold and dismissive, flicked up to her face and then away again, as if the effort of focusing on her was a profound irritation. "I don't have time for staff grievances. See Mrs. Davies." "It's not a grievance, sir. It's a question of loyalty." The words hung in the air, stark and challenging. His typing stopped. A slow, deliberate silence filled the room. He finally swiveled his chair to face her fully, his expression a mask of bewildered annoyance. "Loyalty?" he repeated, the word dripping with condescension. "What could you possibly know about loyalty?" She held her ground, her posture straight despite the servant's costume. "I know it's the foundation of any agreement, any partnership. I was just wondering, sir, if you believe it's a one-way street. If your loyalty is something that can be purchased or if it's conditional on what someone can provide for you." His face underwent a subtle but profound change. The annoyance curdled into something darker, more dangerous. His eyes narrowed, and for the first time, he truly looked at her, really saw the woman standing before him. Not Elara, not yet, but a person who had just asked a question far too pointed, far too insightful for a simple maid. A fissure of confusion cracked through his anger. Who was this woman? What was she implying? "What is the meaning of this?" he demanded, his voice low and tight. He rose from his chair, the movement predatory, his imposing height suddenly feeling less like stature and more like a threat. "What are you suggesting?" The air in the room grew thick and charged. She had thrown a stone into the still pond of his arrogance, and the ripples were spreading. distorting the reflection of the world he controlled. His anger was no longer impersonal. It was focused, confused, and rapidly intensifying. The confrontation had begun not with a revelation of identity, but with a challenge to his character, and the first cracks in his composure were gloriously, terrifyingly real. The air in the study crackled with a dangerous, volatile energy. Julian's confusion had burned away, replaced by a cold, towering fury that seemed to suck the warmth from the room. He took a step closer, his shadow falling over her, his presence an intimidating wall of tailored suit and simmering rage. "You will explain yourself this instant," he hissed, the words sharp and precise. "Who put you up to this? What is this game?" This was the moment. The charade had served its purpose, leading her to this precipice. The weight of the evidence in her pocket, the ache of betrayal in her chest, the memory of his coldness and his calculated schemes, it all coalesced into a single, clear purpose. She did not cower. She stood her ground, her gaze steady on his, and in that moment, she shed the last vestiges of Clara like a worn-out skin. Her hands came up, not in supplication, but with a deliberate, defiant grace. They went to the pins securing the ridiculous lace cap to her hair. She pulled them free, one by one, letting the stiff white fabric fall to the floor at her feet. Then her fingers went to the tight knot at the nape of her neck, the one that held her hair in its severe hidden bun. She pulled it loose. A cascade of rich, familiar chestnut hair tumbled down around her shoulders, its softness a stark contrast to the coarse gray dress. She straightened her spine, lifting her chin, and in that simple, silent act of unveiling, the meek maid vanished. Elara Vance stood before him, her eyes blazing with a fire he had never seen in her, her expression stripped of its usual warmth and replaced with a cold, unforgiving clarity. The transformation was absolute. Julian's face went slack with pure, unadulterated shock. His eyes widened, scanning her features as if seeing them for the first time, his mind visibly scrambling to reconcile the elegant heiress with the servant he had dismissed for a week. The color drained from his face, leaving his skin a pale, waxy mask. He took an involuntary step back, his hand coming up to grip the edge of his desk for support. For a long, suspended moment, there was only the sound of his ragged intake of breath. "Elara?" The name was a choked whisper, devoid of its usual affectionate cadence. It was a sound of pure, stunned disbelief. And then, as swiftly as the shock had arrived, it was gone, burned away by a hotter, more familiar emotion: rage. His confusion solidified into a defensive, aggressive fury. His eyes narrowed, his lips pulling back from his teeth in a snarl. "You!" He spat, the word an accusation. "You deceitful little—" "I learned from the best," she cut in, her voice low and steady, a stark contrast to his spluttering anger. His composure shattered completely. He launched into a tirade, his words a frantic, defensive torrent. This was not an apology, not an explanation born of guilt. It was a justification, a naked attempt to reposition himself as the wronged party. He spoke of protecting his interests, of securing his future, of the necessity of due diligence when marrying into a fortune. He painted his actions as pragmatic, even prudent, a necessary evil in a cutthroat world. The prenup was about asset protection. The investigator was about ensuring there were no nasty surprises. The coldness was simply good business practice. There was not a shred of remorse in his eyes, only a burning, self-righteous anger that she had dared to look behind the curtain, that she had deceived him in order to uncover his own far greater deceptions. He was not sorry for what he had done. He was incensed that he had been caught. The man before her was stripped bare, revealing not a flawed human capable of regret, but a hollow core of avarice and entitlement, furious that his carefully laid plans had been upended by the very person he had considered his pawn. The silence that followed Julian's venomous justification was more deafening than any shout. It was the silence of a door slamming shut on a future that had never truly existed. Elara stood amidst the wreckage of his words, but she felt no more blows. The armor of truth, hard won and bitterly earned, was now firmly in place. She looked at the man she had loved, at the twisted mask of entitlement and rage he now wore, and felt nothing but a vast, hollow calm. The pain was there, a deep, aching bruise on her heart, but it was overshadowed by a clarity so sharp it was almost painful in its own right. Without a word, she turned her back on him. The gesture was final, absolute. She walked out of his study, out of the opulent hallway that was to have been her home, and into the crisp, clean air of the afternoon. She did not look back. The gravel of the drive crunched under the same cheap shoes that had brought her here a lifetime ago. But she walked with a different posture now. Her shoulders were straight, her head high. She was not skulking away. She was walking out, leaving the gilded cage behind forever. The first call was made from the privacy of a small park a block away, her fingers steady on her phone. Her voice was calm, devoid of tears or tremor as she informed her family's lawyer that the engagement was terminated, effective immediately. She cited irreconcilable differences and instructed him to handle all communication with Julian and his representatives. There would be no negotiations, no drawn-out drama. It was a clean, surgical severance. Next, she called Lena. The sound of her friend's voice, brimming with worry and support, finally brought the hot sting of tears to her eyes. But they were not tears of weakness. They were a release, a washing away of the last remnants of the illusion. She spoke quietly, summarizing the brutal truth, her voice gaining strength with each word. She was out. She was free. Returning to her penthouse was like stepping into a museum of a former self. The luxury that had once defined her comfort now felt alien, a testament to a life lived on the surface. She walked through the spacious rooms, her gaze critical. These were the trappings of the privilege Julian had sought to exploit, the symbols of the world that had almost ensnared her. But they were also her tools, her inheritance, her means. Sitting at her own elegant desk, she began to draft a new plan, not for a wedding but for a life. She would not reject her wealth out of some performative shame. That would be another form of deception. Instead, she would reclaim it, redirect it. The Vance fortune would no longer be a target for predators or a cushion for complacency. It would become an engine for authenticity. She sketched out ideas for a foundation supporting financial literacy for young women, a venture fund for ethical startups, a patronage of the arts that sought out raw, unfiltered talent, not just big names. The heartbreak was a real physical weight in her chest, a sorrow for the love she had believed was real. But it was tempered by a ferocious, newfound strength. She had looked into the abyss of greed and deceit and had not fallen in. She had climbed out, armed with the one thing Julian could never steal, her own clear-eyed truth. The life she would build would not be a performance for anyone's benefit. It would be hers alone, built not on the shifting sands of wealth or others' expectations, but on the unshakable foundation of her own hard-won authenticity. The heiress was gone. The woman who remained was just beginning.